So welcome. I have the pleasure of chairing an organization that in many ways shouldn't work. So we all have competing institutions, competing states, difficult times, and maybe like this technology, sometimes it breaks down a little bit. But overall, I think there's a lot of benefit to our working together, and I think the fact that we have such attendance here today for this issue really speaks to the fact that we have more than a local issue when it comes to employability and when it comes to our workforce. I know in New Hampshire, for example, our Business and Industry Association has really made the workforce and the pipeline to a workforce and employability one of its primary objectives and one of its biggest goals for the coming year. It's a major issue in New Hampshire, but it's also a major issue in surrounding states, and that's actually a little different than in the past. In the past, when we had workforce issues, sometimes we could go to our neighboring states and import some of those educated workers, some of those skilled workers to fill gaps and to help support those growing and emerging industries. We can't do that today. We can't do that because every state in New England is suffering from some of the same demographic changes. If we look at high school graduates over the next 15 years, there's not a state in New England that isn't negatively impacted by that. And so as we look at how do we address these issues, this is a regional problem. So it's not going to keep us from competing as far as states go. We're still going to have some state competition. I still expect to see billboards saying we're offering the same in-state tuition as your state, and some of these other kinds of competitive ways that we operate. We're going to continue doing that, but there are real benefits to our collectively working on a number of issues together. For example, how do we get more students into the pipeline? How do we get more high school students to go on to college and to pursue higher education? How do we keep more students here in New England? And how do we strengthen New England as a higher ed destination? We also can work collectively on some of the federal policies that influence us all. So there's a great deal of benefit to our working collectively around what is really a regional problem, even as we also are trying to find some of our own individual institutional and state ways of coping with it. This commission was intended to be a little bit different, both because it's quite large if you look at the membership, and it's really a diverse membership across companies, employers, across higher ed, across policymakers. But one of the key elements of it was that it would be actionable. That we wouldn't just come up with some ideas, we'd come up with lists of things that we could actually do together. And I think that's been one of the hallmarks of the work that's been taking place and going on. So as you look at your role here today, keep that in mind in terms of the actionable part. As Michael laid out, there is an opportunity to give feedback here. We don't want to just have you come and listen and hear all the great panels that we have, but also to engage in conversation, ask questions, and then for several days, for a week after this meeting today, you'll be able to go onto the NEBI website and be able to offer feedback to the recommendations that the Commission is making. So please participate in that. It's my pleasure to introduce Maura Dunn. Maura is Vice President of Human Resources and Administration at General Dynamics Electric Boat, where she oversees safety and health issues, comp and benefits, security, facilities master planning, and a number of other things. She was previously the Vice President of Human Resources and Administration at General Dynamics Advanced Information Systems, and she's held executive positions at KBR. Maura is going to be our convener for this first session. So, Maura, thank you.
Good morning. I'll spare myself the trip to the podium, but I am pleased to say I might actually clear it since I'm only 5'1". I don't often tower over podiums. But good morning and welcome. I am a member of the Commission on Higher Education. I represent Connecticut, but Rhode Island gives me a shout out because my company, General Dynamics, actually has large locations in both sites. And more importantly, we're growing. I came to Connecticut about 3 years ago from Washington, D.C., and I must say I wasn't thrilled since Washington, D.C. specializes in commissions that issue recommendations that don't do a lot, that I thought, well, gee, when I was asked to be part of this, I'm not sure I really want to do this. I have a lot of things going on. What brought me to Connecticut was that electric boat is growing rapidly as a result of changes in our nation's defense and the need for more nuclear submarines, which we're one of only 2 companies in the country that build. Since I've been here, we've hired more than 8,000 people, which is pretty remarkable when you think about it, and the task isn't complete. We still have to hire another 15,000 people to fulfill the needs that the country has. And those are people who need advanced skills of all kinds. Even the jobs of doing what we would all have considered more manufacturing positions in the past require pretty advanced skills when you look at the automation that's required and the computer graphics that actually produce the submarine documents that allow people to build the submarines. So I became quite passionate about this issue once I realized that we had such a large challenge, whether we were trying to find people coming out of high school with skills or people coming out of colleges and universities with engineering degrees from some of the best schools in the country, if not particularly the New England region, which has long been known for its tremendous gifts. What is exciting to me about my work on the commission is that I'm confident that these recommendations are not going to be just another pile of recommendations from another commission where nothing happened, which, as I said, is part of what we specialize in Washington, D.C. But what I can see, and I can already testify that this is happening, we had great partnerships in Rhode Island as a result of Governor Raimondo and her leadership. The entire community has stepped forward to help us regardless of our challenges. So we are working with University of Rhode Island in terms of everything from leadership development to actually producing engineers for us with very customized and tailored solutions to help people, because you can't get a degree in nuclear engineering that helps you learn how to build a submarine. We're talking about super specialized stuff, but at the same time, think about the challenge, because most people don't think about a submarine, of sending 130 young men and women representing our country to some of the most incredibly dangerous places on Earth, and oh, by the way, you're submerged and have to be able to live without outside contact for months at a time. So we need specialized expertise, and that's where University of Rhode Island, Community College of Rhode Island, everybody has stepped in from the governor's office down to help us meet our workforce development challenges. And what is really exciting to me about this is as a result of the commission work that we've done, I think we finally have made huge progress and inroads in Connecticut. Just last month, actually, Mark Ojakian, who's one of the members of the commission, actually approached Electric Boat unsolicited and provided us with a model for how we could work together, which is actually pretty exciting because it's one of the recommendations that the commission has come forward, is to make more of those partnerships work for workforce development, because it's an issue that a company can't take on themselves. It really requires all of us to come together. So I hope that you will share your thoughts and ideas. I assure you over the summer, and we did a lot of work over the summer and spring, there's been a lot of fierce debates coming from industry and community and higher ed. It's obvious we don't always speak the same language, but I think this work has demonstrated to me that we have the ability to find really common ground that, more importantly, puts people to work and changes our economy, which is what you can see happening every day in both Connecticut and Rhode Island. In Connecticut, where Electric Boat is headquartered, the average price of a house has gone up 8% because of our growth in the employability. So while it's easy, I think, for people in the college and university circles to focus on your outcomes, which is students, having them come in and be productive, the real difference is we all benefit and we all win when economic prosperity returns to New England. And with that, I would like all of you to share your thoughts and ideas today, because I'm sure that they will be taken seriously. I didn't think as an employer I would have a lot of people listening to me, but I was pleasantly surprised to hear great exchanges of ideas. And with that, I'd like to introduce Scott Carlson.
Thank you. I'm here today because I've spent the past year looking at the future of work and what's happening to the connection between college and the career market. And today we're going to be having a conversation with President Aoun here about his new book, about what he sees coming in the labor market. But before I get into that, I'm going to talk a little bit about what I've been thinking about over the past year. And I'm going to do it through a prism that I hope is successful, which is in thinking about what's happening with college students today and how they're entering the labor market. It got me thinking about the past quarter century, 25 years of my life entering the job that I do today and where the commonalities are. So let me tell you that story. I had a few great gifts in life, getting to where I am today. And the first was, I discovered early on what I was interested in and what I was good at. I knew I wanted to be a writer. I knew that I loved words. I knew that I loved facts. I read books all the time as a kid. I would spend time sitting writing stories, writing articles. There are many students who get out of college who still have no idea what they want to do. And for me, it came early, and that was a great gift. Unfortunately, having a great gift doesn't mean that you are a great student. And so in high school, in K-12, grade school and high school, I was a rather poor student. I was interested in what I was interested in, and did well at that, and didn't do so well at the rest of it. I think Miss White, my 7th grade teacher, put it well when she said, or maybe not put it well, but at least spoke her mind. She was trying to shove information down my throat and met with my mother at a parent-teacher conference and flatly told her that I would make nothing of myself in life. And she wasn't the only teacher to express her disappointment at such meetings. So I got to the end of my high school career the summer after graduation, and I was not accepted to any college that I had applied to. And that was the second great gift in life, because failure is bracing. And as they say, that lit a fire under my ass. And so I got serious about school, went to night school at the University of Minnesota, got a 4.0, and eventually continued that pattern until I was led in through a back door called General College, which was this college at the University of Minnesota where they let in students who perhaps showed potential, but were on a kind of probation. I continued in college, continuing to work at this idea that I wanted to be a writer. So you're in college and you want to be a writer, and you're not sure what kind of writer, or where you want to go with that, or how you even enter that field. And then came the third great gift in life. And that third great gift was that I had an uncle who worked in higher education. I was about 2 years into college, 2 to 3 years in college, somewhat drifting, learning a lot, learning about writing, growing up as a person. And he gave a call to the house and said, look, I work at American University. We have a program here where you can come to Washington, D.C. and spend 6 months working as a journalist, and that may be something that you might be interested in. That man is in the audience today, and I'm forever grateful to him. So he happened to be friends with the bureau chief of a major newspaper in the United States and made an introduction. I worked at that paper for 6 months and learned the basics. That job, I worked, by the way, with Tom Hamburger, who's a very famous journalist today, and Greg Gordon, who's a well-known investigative journalist who taught me, in part by beating me over the head with telling me what I was doing wrong, and in part by sort of guiding me gently into the world, in part by passing me his tapes and making me transcribe them, learning how an interview happens, learning what journalism is really all about. That job led to a job at the student paper. Once I returned to the University of Minnesota, the University of Minnesota had at the time the largest student newspaper in the country, where people in their 20s took themselves very seriously and were allowed to make mistakes, allowed to make the paper float either on its own merits or not. And that further trained me in this craft that I work at today. That, in turn, led to a job at City Pages, where I worked with Will Hermes, who later went to work for Rolling Stone and National Public Radio, where I worked with Monica Bauerlein, who later became the editor-in-chief of Mother Jones, where I worked with David Shimke, who later became the editor of the Onion Reader. That led to Baltimore City Paper, where I worked with a number of talented journalists who now work with me, some of whom now work with me at the Chronicle. And I later went on to work for glossy magazines of various sorts, local and national, until I landed an entry-level job at the Chronicle nearly 20 years ago, and I've been there ever since. And in thinking about where the labor market is going for young people today, I think about my own children, age 12 and age 15, and I think about what if they were entering the life that I wanted to do? What if they wanted to go into this kind of work? What would they be facing? Well, if I thought K-12 was killing my curiosity before, my children come home today being stuffed with information, being tested constantly, being knocked for transgressions that seem sort of trivial. I think my son failed a test in Phi Ed recently because he didn't wear his gym shorts to a written test on cup stacking, which is apparently a thing in Phi Ed right now. And they're not very happy. My son does better than my daughter does. He's more diligent. But are they discovering the things that they're curious about? I don't know. I slipped into a back door at the University of Minnesota. We're told now today that the standards are higher. That back door at the University of Minnesota is now closed. The University of Minnesota, in its attempt to be a more elite university, did away with General College. So folks like me would have to enter through another means, go to community college, which is fine. Would I have the same experience? Would I be excited in the same way? Would I be around a different crowd? Would people around me be as excited about learning in that environment? Or would I struggle more in that environment? I don't know. We read in the New York Times about the anxiety that young students feel about not achieving early, and the doors that may be closing earlier for them. And I wonder what that leads to eventually in the labor market. It seems like meaningful work experience, meaningful internships are achievable for a certain set of people. Are they achievable for everyone? And as you know, your colleges are attracting more students who are coming out of first-generation households, who are coming out of low-income households. There is no uncle who is best friends or good friends with a Washington bureau chief in those families. What kinds of opportunities are available to those students who are entering higher education? And it's not even clear what kind of opportunities are out there anyway. In my industry, we've seen what Michelle Weiss might call disruption. There are a number of newspapers that are much diminished from what they were, and notably the ones that I worked at. City Pages, where I worked with the editor from Mother Jones, is a shell of its former self. The Minnesota Daily at the University of Minnesota is not the thick paper that it once was, and struggles, I think. City Paper in Baltimore, where I worked with a number of my current colleagues, closed last month permanently. And so, what does that say about the path that we're on as a society? What does that say when we look at where things are going right now at the federal level, and what kind of support we're throwing behind students? And that raises a number of questions, I think, about what colleges need to do. Colleges are already under a lot of pressure to fix things in society. If you think about the towns across the Northeast and the Rust Belt that wouldn't exist were it not for a college in them, we're asking colleges already to do a lot. And now, are we asking them to provide opportunities for students as well, above and beyond the education that you're supposed to provide? What kinds of connections? These are the questions we might ask today. What kinds of connections are colleges obligated to provide to students in the work world? What kinds of supports and how far, how intrusive should those supports be in launching students into real life? What kinds of connections should colleges be making with the alumni that it has and connecting the students to those alumni? Is that a viable path forward? What's our tolerance for failure for students? Failure can be bracing, as I said. Failure can be a valuable experience. For some students, failure can be a dead end. How often are we providing second chances or third chances? How often are we providing those second chances and third chances for students who never had a first chance in the first place? To what extent is the focus on rote memorization at the K-12 level and the testing that is good for some students, bad for others, to what extent is that the fault of colleges that are looking to rank those students for acceptance into their schools to serve their rankings, to serve their status in the game of higher education? And to what extent should a school or a college be less about the absorption of facts and the regurgitation of those facts, and more about helping students discover their interests, discover the places where they can fail, discover the ways that they can recover, discover their talents, the things that they do well, all on their own, the things that they were born to do, in a sense. To what extent is a college there, if you look at what's happening in Washington, D.C. right now where I live, to what extent is a college there or a school there to help a student learn about ethics and empathy and diversity and the broad feeling of what living in a society is all about? And how does that interact with this job that we're asking colleges to do, to connect students to the work world? And are those mutually exclusive or are they complementary? As I said, I worry about my children. I worry about them because of the lack of opportunity. I also worry about them because I look at them and I say, boy, my mother said, my grandchildren will get revenge for me. And she was right. I wake up every day proud and frustrated. And my daughter, who struggles in particular, a girl who sits in her room and can write stories at night, fills up notebooks with stories, fills up notebooks with long math equations that she wants to do on her own, struggles in school every day. And now that she's 12, she's discovering makeup and so on, and so she sits in her room for hours every day putting on makeup, and she has this artistic sensibility about it. She came down yesterday to the kitchen with her face painted like David Bowie from Ziggy Stardust and declared that she wanted to be a makeup artist when she gets older. This is her latest career aspiration. And we might have hoped for astrophysicist or Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist, but my wife said, makeup artist is where she's showing her talent, and it's unlikely that robots will take that over in the future. So, could be bright futures for everyone in the Carlson family. But this is a segue to talk about the conversation that we're going to have today with President Aoun, and the questions that we want to talk about here. This conversation is not going to happen the way that some of these conversations tend to be at panels like this, at conferences like this, where I sit up here and ask all the questions and he responds. I'm going to ask a couple questions at the beginning, and then I want to have a back and forth discussion between the audience and President Aoun and maybe myself. I'll try to stay out of it as much as possible. And maybe a conversation that happens between all of us across aisles. Keep your questions short and sharp. Keep your comments short and sharp. Let's keep this conversation going. But let's start that conversation. We know what school has been for the past 100 years. And we know what its purpose was and what it was designed to do for an industrial environment. What should school become in the future?
Scott, let me mention that your presentation was very personal and very moving. And I would like to acknowledge your uncle who is here. You acknowledge him, but I would like to ask him to stand and be recognized. Where is your uncle? Here he is. Are you still with American? No. I think you did a great job, and I won't worry too much about your kids because he's still here, and many of us will be uncles too for them.
Sounds great.
Anyway, it's great to be here with all of you, so many familiar faces. And thank you for Nebi for organizing this important gathering, focusing on employability. So let me go back to what Scott asked. You know, how is higher education changing, or how should it change given the new reality? Higher education has been extremely resilient. When we moved into the industrial revolution, we adapted to this industrial revolution. And similarly, when we moved to the information revolution, also higher education has adapted. And we are now facing a new revolution, which is the AI revolution. What does it mean? It means that we are facing situations now where machines are smart and getting smarter, and smarter by the day. Well, what are the implications? The implications are well known by now. Various studies are projecting that in the next 20 years, up to 50% of the jobs we know are going to disappear. And many of these jobs also are going to be transformed totally. Yes, there will be new jobs created. What we don't know is whether the new jobs are going to be enough to replace the old jobs. But if we are facing a situation where half of the jobs we know are going to disappear, what is the responsibility and the obligation of higher education? The responsibility of higher education and our opportunity is to make our students, our learners, robot-proof. And how do we do it? In my book, Scott, I provide a blueprint for what can be done. First, I introduce a new curriculum called the Humanics. And Humanics is based on the integration of 3 literacies. An information literacy, namely every student should understand how machines work and how to interact with these machines. Second, a data literacy, which means that machines are generating a lot of data, and we need to understand how to navigate the data and how to make sense of them. And the third literacy is the human literacy. The human literacy is ultimately what makes humans different from machines. What are these literacies? You know them, you practice them, and its ability to be creative, to be entrepreneurial, to be ethical, to be empathetic, to be culturally agile, to be able to have a systems approach. You wrote a lot about that. The ability to be global. And what Humanics is really the integration of the 3 literacies. The human literacy, the data literacy, and the information literacy. But you say, it's easier said than done. How do you teach creativity? How do you teach entrepreneurship? How do you teach cultural agility? How do you teach system thinking? You can read books and books about entrepreneurship and you don't become an entrepreneur. This is where experiential education is essential. What is experiential education? It's the integration of the classroom experience with the world experience. What you call the meaningful internships. We have an obligation to provide an experiential education because that's the only way people, learners, students get to understand what they're good at in the same way actually your uncle provided you with an experiential education.
Absolutely.
But he did it. The university did not. Your university, your original alma mater did not.
Through the Minnesota Daily, but that's an independent. You have to find that on your own.
Exactly. And the point is that you have to integrate that as part of parcel of our educational mission, of our learning. Experiential education is a learning approach that integrates the classroom experience with the world experience. It allows the students to understand what they're good at, what they like, to understand how to work in teams, to understand how to be empathetic with others, how to be culturally agile, because the workplace is diverse. The world is diverse, to be global, and how to approach system thinking. So what I'm calling for is a new curriculum called Humanics that's based on the integration of 3 literacies. How to achieve it is through experiential education. But it's not enough. Machines are smart, as I said, but they will get smarter. And therefore, there will be new fields being created constantly. Which means that we are not set for life with a BA degree or a BS degree or a master's degree or a PhD. Lifelong learning is with us, and we have to integrate lifelong learning as part of higher education. Higher education had a kind of schizophrenic and uneasy approach to lifelong learning. We do it on the side. We often view that as maybe a money-making operation. Shh, let's not talk too much about it. You're an example of that because, as a lifelong learner, you have less opportunity now because they closed what allowed you to get in. Lifelong learning has to be part and parcel of what we do. Part and parcel of what we do. Otherwise, who is going to educate, to upskill people? We have to integrate that as part of our mission. But it's easier said than done, once again, because it is not enough to build them and they will come, to build a curricula. Lifelong learners are in the workplace, are busy people. You cannot ask them to come back to you and spend a year or 2 years with you. You have to go to them. You have to provide what they need. It's on demand. We have to learn how to customize, how to personalize what we do. That's the new change, Scott, that you asked me about. AI is going to change the workplace, make jobs disappear, create new jobs, and our goal is to make people robot-proof through humanics, experiential education, and the integration of lifelong learning.
You mentioned systems thinking. Maybe for those who in the audience that are not familiar with that, maybe give a brief description of what that means to you.
Let me start with, we surveyed, and we survey every year employers. And we asked them, what are you looking for? They said, yes, we like to have, going back to your point, of great engineers. But what makes a great engineer? It's not the ability to understand the domain only. It's the ability to work with other people coming at it from different horizons people who are focusing on this technical aspect with people focusing on the human aspect. You mentioned that you're building submarines, correct?
Correct.
And then when you build submarines, you have to take into account the people who live in these submarines for days and days. You have to take into account the life space that they have, the workspace, how do they interact with each other? Is it a pleasant environment or not? And that's a simple example of that. Systems thinking is the ability to be the coach, the orchestrator, that will allow you to work with different disciplines and integrate them, and in order to serve the people who are going to use your products. And I have examples. You know, I chose your example today because you're here. But, you know, when we surveyed people at GE, when they build the engine for the planes that you are riding, same thing. They need people to understand not only these aspects of the technology, but how to put it together. How to fly them while they are building them. That's systems thinking.
I'm going to go to the audience in a moment. I want to ask another question first, however. So it seems like the future of education is all about hybridization. It's about putting things together that we wouldn't normally think should be put together, or we don't think of as a part of a system. And we're doing that. We want to do that in a higher education environment that is known for being siloed. How do we solve that problem?
Look, in some ways, let me tell you, I love the way you said it. It's about integration. You know, everything I'm calling for is about integration. You asked me if you want a question, how do we get higher education to do it? In fact, higher education in the United States has a culture of experimentation, has a culture of innovation, which is not true in many other places. And this is due to the fact that, you know, we don't have one approach, one cookie-cutter approach to higher education. In other countries, the government decides on your curriculum, decides on everything you want to do. Here we have privates, we have publics, we have community colleges, we have for-profits, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We have small liberal arts colleges, and we all represent that. But every time we tackle a change, you know, the question becomes, how can we do it? The answer is simple. Don't ask for consensus. The problem in higher education, we always ask for a vote. If you believe in innovation, experimentation, and academic freedom, every time you want to introduce a change, you always have the same formula. People who are ready to embrace this change, early adopters, people who are naysayers against any change, and the large majority is in between. Our mistake in higher education is to ask everybody to vote before we do it, whereas our approach has been different. Let's empower people who want to start this change. Let them become the role models, the proof. Let them run with it, and let them carry the rest. So it's no longer about you. As leaders or administrators, the owners become the early adopters, and they become the proof that this could happen.
Does anyone want to ask a question about that last comment? Because that's great.
Or any comment.
Or any comment.
Otherwise, I'll ask your uncle a question.
Go ahead.
Could you come here?
Sure.
Good morning. Do you mind identifying yourself and your institution?
And I'm with Big State.
Great.
To your last point, colleges haven't typically been very good at research and development, largely because of the way that you have reward systems. So if you're interested in a customized approach that addresses
You see, I will take a different approach in the following way. You said universities have not done R&D. Actually, R&D is our bread and butter, correct? That's why our faculty colleagues, by definition, are always thinking about new theories, new models, new domains, new fields, etc. In any institution, whether it's a community college, a liberal arts college, or a research university. However, what's interesting is that we want to change the world, but we don't want to change ourselves. And therefore, I would not approach it as how do you get the Senate. I would approach it differently. If you believe, once again, in academic freedom, and I'm sure everybody does, including your Senate, then you can give incentives for people to innovate in learning, in customized approaches, in personalized approaches. You can see that with small grant, with course release, bring them together to run with it. People like to be involved in new things, especially if they shape that. So I won't start with the Senate. I'll start with you. As an administrator, as a leader, what incentives, it's in your hands, are you giving to people in order to innovate? And it doesn't require much. When we introduced, for instance, what we call the hybrid, online hybrid experiential learning, that was new. Wasn't completely new. We didn't ask the whole community to go and do it. We said, who would like to start experimenting with that? Similarly, we're introducing the experiential master. We introduced the experiential masters, the experiential PhD. It's really you. It's in your hands. It's in your pocket too. Thank you.
That's my point. I think you're correct. When we emphasize big R and we emphasize little D.
Yeah.
You know, we do a lot of research, but we don't do a lot of development.
Absolutely.
I think you have a follow-up. So in my pocket, would for instance, North be interested in, as we develop new pedagogy, develop
Absolutely.
programs, do you share the financial results with your faculty?
Absolutely. It's not only financial results. Look, if indeed we are right that there is an AI revolution that is going to displace jobs, higher education needs to be relevant. Otherwise, it becomes obsolete. We already have signs of that. Companies are starting what they call universities. Do you think it's their core business? No. Why are they doing it? Because we're not meeting their needs. When you design in your operations, when you want a t-shirt with the logo of your college or institution, do you fabricate that yourselves? No. You go to Nike, Under Armour, or whatever. Because it's not your core competence. It is not the core competence of companies to do it. But we didn't embrace lifelong learning. What happened? They did it, and who jumped at it? For profits. And we say, oh, we don't like for profits, but they are doing something that we're supposed to do. So, if we don't want to become obsolete, we have to lead. And that's our opportunity.
You know, I wrote a recent story about, in my series on the path from college to work, and I posted it to social media, and a lifelong friend of mine who's a history professor commented on it and said, you know, great story, but I don't educate students for jobs. I educate students for civic life and their spirit.
Yeah.
To what extent are we making false distinctions there?
I love that, because we introduced a false dichotomy between learning to live and learning to earn a living. It's about time to go beyond that. Many colleagues at other institutions tell me our job is not to take care of jobs. It's a false dichotomy. Why are we seeing, in your introduction, Michael, you talked about cost, correct? Why are we seeing people questioning higher education? Because we isolated ourselves from the outcome. People need an outcome after they finish, and meaning they need jobs too. That's why you are focusing on employability. We can't afford not to do it. We pay the price. And therefore it's in our hands. And ask yourselves, if an institution doesn't want to do it, that's an opportunity for you. Because they leave a gap. So this dichotomy between learning to live and learning to earn a living doesn't work anymore. You're hearing it everywhere, from the parents, the students, the politicians, and society at large.
Somebody want to ask another question? Make a comment? Anyone?
That means I convinced you all.
He's my plant in the audience.
No. And thank you for your comment. Okay, so I'm a product of a liberal arts undergraduate. My wife is, my son is. My son's a professor of a liberal arts college at this point in time. The thing that I worry about, and I'm very bullish, and I'm a business school professor indeed, I'm very bullish on where things are going. I worry, however, about a lack of breadth that as we shift into this and employability becomes the focus, that we don't have the opportunity to pivot and go forward. Because for lifelong learning to succeed, there's got to be this base, and I'm fearful that we are losing that base. I have a cousin who I think was the brightest of all of us. Things hit her like Scott, and it didn't work out that well, but she got a community college degree, she got into programming, she super did well in that, but her entire career she's hit a ceiling in that, and I worry that we create a situation where people can't adapt to stay ahead of the machines.
Uncle, I agree with you, but I don't worry. I don't know your name, so I'm calling you Uncle. So let me tell you, this is why I'm mentioning that humanics is the base for the curriculum. Essentially, when you look at learners, you have two groups. Those who are short on experience, long on time. Those are the traditional undergrads. And what I'm calling for is for everyone to be versed in humanics, which is the integration of three curricula. The information curriculum, information literacy, the data literacy, and the human literacy, which is creativity, entrepreneurship, cultural agility, ethics, global system thinking, all these. So and then the second group is people who are short on time, long on experience, and that's the lifelong learning approach, where you have people in their 30s, 40s, 50s, whatever, 60s, they need to understand data literacy, cybersecurity, human informatics, etc., health informatics. And that's you give them through certificates, stackable certificates, etc. But the liberal arts base is through the integration of the three literacies. As a matter of fact, Uncle, you are seeing now, as we speak, liberal arts colleges integrating an experiential component precisely because they realize that we cannot afford to put students in a campus for 4 years or whatever and close it. The liberal arts are doing that. And in fact, you know that many liberal arts colleges are seeing a real decline. And those who are a real decline in applications. You are even seeing a wave of mergers and acquisitions and consolidation. That's not good for the nation. So rather than pitting a liberal education and an education that is focusing on employability, integrate the two. That's humanics, that's experiential education.
You take an international view, and we're in a global environment. What are you seeing internationally in terms of governments, higher education, overseas higher education institutions, and so on, and their attitudes about training, automation, AI, and so on?
You know, when we look at AI, I said that almost 50% of the jobs in the next 20 years, various studies are saying that will disappear, and we have a list even of the jobs. Even the job of a president one day may be at risk. No, I hope not. But when you look at the world is reacting differently to that. Japan is looking at it as an opportunity, saying we have an aging population, people are aging, we don't have a workforce, who's going to take care? We had a meeting with the Prime Minister, and he said to us, we're not going to open our door for immigration. We have a solution, and the solution is robots. Robots are going to take care of manufacturing and take care of the elderly. China is looking at it differently, saying whoever wins the AI revolution will win the world, and therefore we have to focus and invest a lot in AI at all levels in universities. England is interesting because it's looking at it and saying, look, if people if we lose jobs, we have to ask every company to put together a percentage of its margin in order to re-educate and reskill people. Other places are looking at it differently. For instance, in the Scandinavian countries and in some provinces in Canada, they are talking about universal basic income. But what is clear in all these places is that they are investing in higher education to ride this. You know, I wrote an op-ed last week, Michael, you referred to it, saying the tax reform is misguided because if people are going to lose their jobs, robots do not pay taxes, and robots are not consumers. Let's be careful out there.
I want to be mindful of time. How much time left in the session? Got about 20 minutes? Okay. Let me ask one more question, and then we're going to have a couple of responses to the things that we've said here. And I always end with my portion with a question like this, and I want you to give an honest answer.
Are you assuming that I didn't give an honest answer
No.
before?
No. But this kind of question, you always get the optimistic answer, and I hope if you're optimistic, that's great. But we're entering a world where, you know, as you pointed out, automation is coming, and there will be a number of jobs that are elevated. Automation will increase productivity, and there will be a number of people who ascend to the upper end of the hourglass and are doing more intellectual work, more varied work, and so on. There is going to be a number of people, a number of positions where it's too expensive to build a robot to replace them, and so, and they're not paid enough to build a robot to replace them anyway, so there will be a number of people at the bottom. And there may be a winnowing of positions in the middle. Let's take that future combined with what we're seeing going on in states, in federal government, and the money that's going toward education, the emphasis on education, and what's happening to the middle class, what's happened to the Rust Belt, to the agricultural communities in this country. with that wave of automation? Are you optimistic or pessimistic about the future?
Well, let me start by giving you an example, a real example. We worked with the Bloomberg folks, the foundation, and we worked with them on precisely the future of work. And what they have done is very simple. They interviewed the truck drivers. Why the truck drivers? You all know, because their jobs are at risk. And they said to them, well, are you worrying? They said, no, we don't worry. They went a step further. And they interviewed the unions in charge of the truck drivers. And they said, are you worried? And the union said, no, we're not worried. But they didn't explain why. So if you look at it, people who are impacted, and people are going to be impacted at all levels. Not only blue collar, white collar. As a matter of fact, machines are colorblind. They're going to hit everyone. Accountants, lawyers, medical doctors. So let's start with us. I am optimistic if we recognize this challenge and this opportunity. Yes, politicians are not helping now, but we're not helping because we have the opportunity to mobilize ourselves, our alumni, our constituencies, to push for that. We have an enormous constituency, our alumni. So if you look at it on a global level, we still have the only performing system in the world, I believe. But we cannot take it for granted. Do we have challenges? Yes. But we cannot afford to be pessimistic. Can you afford to be pessimistic when you look at your daughter and your son? No. Every student that you have is your daughter and your son. You cannot afford to be pessimistic. That's out of the question. Onward.
Okay. Would you like to respond?
So there's a lot to respond to, but a few thoughts. First off, I'm Tara Amaral. I'm with Fidelity Investments. Hopefully some of you are customers in a variety of ways.
I'm a customer.
That's good to hear.
So be nice to me.
I will be nice. We're nice to everybody. A couple of thoughts, and I say this as a liberal arts graduate. I went to Brown University, where I started off a math major, but quickly integrated many other disciplines, as do most students at Brown. As a parent of 3 college students who are thinking about what they want to do and don't want to do what I do, they don't want to come to an office, it's one of their big things, they want to experience the world. And then with my employer hat on, where we're trying to understand what are the kind of jobs we need to offer students coming out of colleges, and then how do we equip people that are with us to continue to reskill themselves. From a college perspective, we hire anywhere from 1,200 to 2,000 students across the nation with a big hub in New England. A third of our company are technologists, literally a third, and people don't think of us as a fintech firm, but we actually are. And so we're competing just like McDonald's or Goldman Sachs against Facebook and Uber and everybody else. And so we actually have a challenge from a brand perspective in trying to make financial services exciting, which it's lost a little luster over the last couple decades. But then also, how do we create an environment where we want to make sure that people come to work every day wanting to learn? So we have started to build those internal academies ourselves and with partners. We have an AI academy, we have a digital academy, to not just reskill the technologists, but to reskill the entire business community. And what we found is, as an organization, we need to go from the traditional waterfall development to agile development for all aspects of the business. And that's a change management process for people that work with us. And so that's on the hearts and minds of everybody within the organization. I do find that we've had a resurgence in the attraction of the liberal arts graduate. Kurt, who's on the commission, led a project to look at what we should be offering for kind of an underserved population of liberal arts students at both large universities and smaller. And what we found was interesting. Most of our senior management were liberal arts majors, and they'd been with the firm quite a long time. We found that they were great problem solvers. They knew how to collaborate. They knew how to talk. They learned how to use data over time. And they really came to the table every day, reinventing themselves, moving from business to business. And we thought that actually gave us some of our initial competitive advantage. So in some cases, while we're a company of experts, we've gone back to the idea that you need to be well-rounded and you need to show up as a learner and a problem solver. And we're starting to recruit students in that realm. We actually just started a small, what we call an Emerging Leaders Program, and we are oversubscribed, I should say, from both small and large institutions with wonderful diversity of school, of geography, socioeconomic, and others. So we're really excited about that. I think one of the challenges we find is that how do you keep people interested? So we're actually having a commitment to at least 60% mobility across the firm. That means that we have to have experiences which are different, give people choices, and allow them to continue to learn with fidelity as well as go back to school. And we have commitments not only to allow associates to go back to school, but we also have a student debt repayment program which helps them pay off their debt sooner, which I think does differentiate us as well. I think when the jobs that are going away, we had a group of interns last summer. We have about 1,000 interns every year across the United States. I was talking to a group in Jersey City for coffee, and half of them said, the job I'm doing now shouldn't exist. They knew the job was going to go away. Absolutely. And so they were coming to do work, and they're like, well, what do I do to be part of the jobs that are going to be here? And do you know which jobs are going away? We don't. We know that we're constantly looking at things. But it was interesting to hear the workforce the incoming workforce who was working along people who didn't realize yet that maybe their job would be changing. And I think that the graduates come to work today knowing that nothing's going to be static, that they're going to have to be constant learners and figure out how do they go from one field to the next, and making sure that they're positioned for excelling in the future.
You know, if I may, sure. Scott, what you're doing is exactly what needs to be done. I applaud you. I knew about it, and Kurt is part and parcel of our institution too, and would always remain. So his is in both. You see, once again, going back to the question that Uncle raised and you raised, nowadays, you cannot afford to be an engineer without having a human literacy. And you cannot afford to be a pure liberal arts major without understanding the information literacy and the data literacy, and to integrate them. And that's the point. And so essentially, the point is not to say, once again, to resurrect this dichotomy between liberal arts and employability. It's the integration. And that's what you're doing. That's what you're doing. On another level, I want to ask you a question. I worked with many multinationals, and they had various, what they call universities in various countries, in various languages. I don't know whether you have that, but they had it in Italian, in Spanish, in Chinese, etc. And I said, how do you control the quality? They said, we don't know. We don't know. How do you control quality across the world and multilinguistically?
So we are an English-based company for the most part, but one of the things that we're actually trying to do is understand how can we even control the quality domestically. So one of the things we're concerned about is if somebody rates themselves as a guru or an apprentice, what does it actually mean? So whether we have to develop our own individual badging process or there becomes an industry standard on what does proficiency mean at the various levels, it's actually a concern for us. We have a lot of people in our recent recruit, they may have been an art history major, but they code as well. And so we're trying to look at these students as crossover. They may not have the exact experience as somebody who's
Absolutely.
a computer science major, but they're definitely proficient. In fact, they're probably more passionate about it because they're taking time out of their regular studies to pursue something that may be off book for them. The other thing that we have a concern with, and it's taken a while for us to convince some of our partners within Fidelity, is I'm not a big fan of GPAs. Having gone to Brown, some of you may know we don't have to have a GPA at Brown. And I know that definitely formulates my passion for people being able to experiment without being penalized. So I worry, just the way that kids have to major in a sport at age 10 or younger these days, how do they get to continue to explore different topics when this idea of a grade point is hanging over their head, and a lot of employers say, if you're not a bop, don't even apply. It really stifles the ability for somebody to be curious about something with no risk. Funny story, I have 3 kids in college, and I didn't know at Brown you could drop a course up until the day before a final. So when my kids were going through the first anxiety of adding and dropping courses, and I said, what are you talking about? I honestly had no clue that within 10 days at some schools, you had to make a decision about the next 4 months. And I felt their pressure that, oh my God, I don't even know if I'm gonna like this. I wanna spend my time doing things that are gonna broaden my horizon. So I do think that some of the structure actually does force some less creative processes for students who are really
Good.
going to school to start to connect the dots.
You see why, Scott, I'm optimistic? Because of what you just said. I'm optimistic at 2 levels. One is that you love your alma mater because you keep referring to it. I hope you give them money.
I do.
Good. Second,
I give a lot of time too.
good. Excellent. Second is that the employer is going to push for that, for this change,
Yeah.
saying, I'm not looking only at that. And how do you assess quality? That's where experiential education comes into play. When you spend 6 months in a company, they get to know you, they get to see what you're good at, whether you fit, etc. And also the learner gets to do that. We have 3,000 companies working with us in 146 countries. And that's exactly, if you push in this direction, we are very happy because you're looking at the outcome. You're not looking at the input measures only. Finally, you mentioned that you have badges. That's an enormous opportunity for education. We just signed an agreement, I think, last month with IBM. They have 5,000 badges. We looked at each one of them and we said, we are going to integrate those badges in our lifelong learning approach. So if somebody has badges from IBM, they qualify and they move into that. We made this agreement. So that means that we have to change our approach to the curriculum because traditionally, we faculty say, we own the curriculum. Okay? The curriculum is a shared ownership of the learner, the employer, and ourselves. And that's another opportunity. So things are changing, let's change.
I want to give you an opportunity to comment as well.
Well, I would say that this conversation is representative of many that we've had all summer and all year on the commission and their work. But to me, the piece that's missing, and I think that's been my full-time job, is to really focus on, excuse me, those who are not part of traditional higher ed. If you look at the jobs, you talk about the middle-class people that are not represented. We've spent an hour and we didn't talk about them at all. Mm-hmm. I was fortunate in that I'm a multi-generation college graduate, but I work with lots of people, and they're the ones, frankly, who are angry at our society because they haven't seen the opportunities for them. And what's encouraging to me about the Commission's work is that we did spend some time focusing on people that many in the higher education realm choose to ignore. And frankly, we have a K through 12 system, and I say that. I sit on the board in Rhode Island for vocational schools. And what's encouraging to me, particularly in New England, as a girl who grew up in the South, I see that the community college systems, whether we like it or not, are stepping up and filling some of that void. And there are people that you frankly can't come in and do a job like ours, welders, which frankly will make more than many of the liberal arts grads. And I went to University of Richmond, which is a pretty good school in Virginia. If you look at it, there will be liberal arts grads like myself that will come out and make less than a welder does. And yet the welder who's going to ensure that we have a product that's safe and capable of defending America and the academic freedoms you hold dearly, that welder needs to be able to understand higher concepts, many of the things that you've talked about. And you're not getting that, frankly, out of high school today. So we have to have your help from the college and university system Because I can build Electric Boat University, but I can't and I don't have the time to deliver curriculums. And where I've seen a gap be filled that frankly doesn't get a lot of conversation, I think that's been my full-time job here, is to help the college and university system understand that if we want to deal with income disparity, we have to figure out how to get the kids who aren't going to college, and that's like 60% of the kids that are graduating from high school, higher level skills. I mean, if you look at it, to even know where you have to go weld on a submarine requires knowledge of trigonometry, which if somebody had tried to make that relevant to me when I was sitting in a class at University of Richmond or at Princess Anne High School in Virginia Beach, it would have been helpful. But that integration is missing. And what's encouraging to me about the recommendations that I see, but it requires people to turn it into an action agenda. We have to go talk about these people, and we can't live in a world where everybody is capable of going to an Ivy League institution.
We talk about education as something that lifts all boats, and yet it's something actually that cuts society up.
Yes. Let me mention, I couldn't agree more with you. Higher education, our mission is education. And therefore, we have a responsibility from K to grade. That's my point. Now, what does it mean? It makes you smile about the grades. Some of us have grades. Some of us have grade. So it means that, you know, the K through 12 system, we have to embrace and see what we, you know, the opportunities and help them. So let me give you an example. We are built an enormous expertise over 100 years in experiential education. So we convened 70 schools last year in the nation and Canada to bring them to Northeastern and spend a couple of weeks to start a network because they have been doing experiential education and they wanted to further that. Our goal, and then we created this network that will remain with us and among each other. Next year, we're going to double it, triple it, etc. And we're going to take it to, and it wasn't in New England only. It was in the West Coast, East Coast, you know, the South, Canada, as I mentioned. We need to look at it and engage ourselves with the pipeline. Because that's what you're talking about, is a pipeline. And if we ignore this pipeline, we are going to face a situation where either they will not come or where they will come totally unprepared. And we're not talking about Ivy or not Ivy. We're talking across the board. I couldn't agree more with you. We have a responsibility in higher education, and our responsibility is to K to grade. We have to prepare this pipeline.
I want to be mindful of the time. I think we're out of time at this point. I want to thank the three of you for joining me on stage and talking about this. And I want to thank all of you as well.